Please become a Patreon and support the show. Merci.
And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
Nastazja Domaradzka is a Polish-born performer and stage director who has spent her entire career in the theatre working in Great Britain, London specifically. She's worked at the Almeida Theatre, the Theatre Royal Stratford East, and is currently directing a devised project for the Royal Court Theatre in London. The project she's working on is called No Borders and asks the question, which is relevant to all of us, no matter what continent we reside on: why do theatre in the 21st century? Nastazja Domaradzka, welcome to Animal Farm.
Welcome, and thank you for having me.
You are currently joining us from London.
Yes.
But you are not British by birth. You came from Poland. You are a stage creator, you're a director, and you have worked quite a bit with youth programs through drama schools in London. But one of the big projects you're working on now is a devised project. And so I'm going to ask a series of questions. Let's start with how you got to Britain and why. And had you done, Poland has quite a dynamic theatre scene with a number of festivals. Why you chose to, you had mentioned that you did very little work in Poland yourself and that you actually waited to do your work until you got to the United Kingdom. So could you give us a sense of that backstory?
So long story short, I think I've always wanted to live abroad. I think that was the thing for me. And I'm also from that generation, the post Berlin Wall generation, if you can call it that, of, we grew up very much with the old system still in there, the shadow of it still being there, but we grew up with, the opportunities of borders being open up to us and no longer being behind that iron curtain. And from pretty much from when I can remember in school or, generally amongst, family or elders, my generation was very much encouraged to leave the country. And, because we had the opportunities that our parents didn't.
Where in Poland did you grow up? Where in Poland did you grow up?
So I grew up in a place called Opole, which is south west of Poland, and a very theatrical town, because this is where Grotowski started out originally his Theatre of 13 Rows.
You said southwest. Yeah. You said southwest of Poland. You meant southwest of Warsaw.
So southwest of Poland, near the Czech Republic border. That's what I mean. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's quite a big town, a city. Around 250,000 people live there, and it has very good theatrical scene. One big national theatre, one puppetry theatre, quite a culturally affluent place, I would say. And again, growing up with that, that old system, the shadow of the old system still in place. I think culture was very important to me as a kid. When I was growing up, I remember, going to the theater when I was in primary school on trips, and it was just something that was quite present in my life always. And then that idea of, I can do what my parents couldn't, and just, get on a plane and leave. And then, as I was saying earlier, Poland joined the European Union, and I think that really became the gate opening for my generation. On top of that, I think, there's this idea of, us wanting to explore what it's like to go to Western countries, what it's like where you have many more opportunities thrown at you. So yeah, I think I just wanted to, I always wanted to have that adventure of living somewhere else. And I always knew that I was going to leave Poland at some point. And I actually went to Ireland first and lived there for 2 years. And from there, I visited London a couple of times while I was living there, and it just felt like such a me place. And I have a very complex relationship to what is home and what is home as a, geographical place. And there was just something that really, there was something that was speaking to me in London.
Two questions. How long have you been outside of Poland? How long have you been in the UK?
I've been outside of Poland my whole adult life. So I left, 13 years pretty much.
Okay.
And before that, as I said, Ireland 2 years, and now London 10 years.
And are there any ramifications for you of Brexit on that whole complicated saga?
So yes, there are. I think there are physical ramifications, and then there are, spiritual, sanity situation, so to speak. And my, there's the thing of, I had to obtain a document that I didn't have to have before, which is the settled status. And, I think the wise thing for me to do now is to apply for British citizenship. So there's that as well. And but on the on a different level, I think it's the spiritual cost of it all. And what happens when you live somewhere, you are given certain rights based on where you're from, which is already quite problematic. And all of a sudden, these rights are kind of stripped away. And for me, Brexit and everything that happened around it, it was a very unstable period for me, because I there wasn't any sort of direction. People didn't know what's going to happen. And I think that is also quite visible in the way theater in this country works. And there is a point to be made about theater representing, mirroring the society that it exists in, right? And this is a conversation that I've been having with few fellow migrant theatre makers who are based in Britain. And, British theatre, unfortunately, has become very closed off. If you compare it to where it was, 15, 20 years ago, it feels quite like an insular space right now. And that's how the country feels as well.
Yes, almost by policy. What were the rights that you said were granted to you and that were stripped away specifically?
The right to stay and work here.
Okay.
If you do not have that piece of paper, that settled status, which I believe that the Home Office website crashed on the day of the deadline. Because so many people were applying to it. There was no clear communication as well about how it was to work. And, it's the whole thing of, does law work backwards? If I am, it's a principle, right? If I live here, if I study here, if I get educated and I work here, why all of a sudden am I faced with these obstacles?
Yeah. And what did you do upon arriving in the UK? You said you went to Ireland first, and then you settled in London.
Yes.
And how did you obviously had some sense that you wanted to work in the theatre, and we'll get to the whys of that in a moment. But how did that manifest itself? Did you go to a training academy, or just join a theatre, or both?
No, I think I always say that I'm the living proof of you can go anywhere, and if you are determined enough and work hard enough, and a bit of luck as well, of course, you'll get there. Because I came to Britain knowing nothing about British theatre and nothing, and maybe I knew what Shakespeare's Globe was, some basic sort of buildings or institutions, and I had maybe a sense of the British theatre history, the Elizabethan theatre, but I really didn't know anyone. I didn't know how the system works. The system is very, very different to Polish, theatre system. And first couple of years I worked, I remember many days of just, being in bookshops and reading different books and finding things out for myself. So just the story of the immigrant, arriving somewhere that they really don't know, don't recognize, nothing's very familiar. And I think I remember the first time I went to the theater in this country, and I was at the Globe, and I was one of the groundlings. So, the £5 tickets, standing in the pit. And I was just one of the most, incredible experiences just to be that close to that history. And gradually, I did train here originally as an actor, because and I think that that's still one of my strengths, is that I understand the craft from that point of view. But I very quickly realized after graduating, I went into that sort of make your own company, work with people, make your own work, put it out there, get yourself in debt, which is what so many, theater makers who graduate do. And I quickly realized that it wasn't for me, or just performing. Yeah, I love it. It fed me to some level, but I wanted to have more agency, and I wanted to make actors realize as well that they have more agency in their work. I'm much more into the collaborative process rather than, come and do this and do that the way the director tells you to do it. So I think that's where, I then went to do a master's in applied theatre at Central when I already started directing, because I felt like I needed a year to myself where I can just bury myself in books and figure out what it is that I exactly want to do with my practice, and how is my background informing my practice. And that's when I actually, connected very much with my Polish roots, which is interesting, because that's what a lot of, I think artists who live abroad always say, that, you don't necessarily understand your background or your cultural background until you're taken out of it. Yes. You almost have to identify yourself again through a different perspective.
Interesting. And somehow you found yourself working at the Almeida and at the Theatre Royal Stratford East. And in what capacities did you work there?
As a director. So I did with Theatre Royal Stratford East, I did a project last summer, a device project that was written by Tash Brown, who's a brilliant playwright and theatre maker as well. And we work with a company of young women as part of the, sort of a youth, young company that is attached to Stratford East. And we made a show called Scream Fire for a Revolution, which was a show about, revolutions and what does it mean to be a young woman in London, trying to, make a day-to-day life happen and coming across many obstacles.
Yes. So devised work, that seems to be what you keep sliding into. And as you said, to give the actors agency.
Yes, I would say that there's a part of me that, because I am not word or written work led. I think devising is something that people often see as my strength. That doesn't mean that I don't like scripts or working with writers. I actually, when I started directing was at Vault Festival, which is the biggest theatre festival in London. It happens in underground near Waterloo Station. And it's, it's a off West End, very much full of, emerging theatre makers and artists program. And I've often worked there with new writing. So it's not necessarily that I cannot, find myself in word-led work, but I think there's something about devising, especially in regards to the work that I'm trying to make, that unlocks a lot of potential for me and the people I work with.
So now you're now working at the Royal Court Theatre, which is the home of the new voices, playwright-driven new voices, and yet you are stepping in, not working on a new play, not new scripted play, but you're devising something. How did that happen? And how did you get the royal court to kind of shift? No, I wouldn't say shift their emphasis. They certainly are not in any way giving up on new writing, but to open this new window for them.
Yes, so two things. It's a theatre makers program, which doesn't necessarily exist in contradiction to the writers program at the court, but it's also a program that focuses on work that doesn't center Anglo-Saxon practices, or for a lack of better word, Western practices. And I think that's the key, rather than focusing on whether that's where I'm getting at it with it. And the project's called No Borders as well. And it started out, I am one of the co-founders of Migrants in Theatre, which is an organization that lobbies for a better representation of migrants in British theatre. We started out during the pandemic, although really we started out over coffees probably around 4 years ago, myself and few other migrant makers who are non-British born, because we just had this realization of, London is a pot of, different languages, different cultures, different experiences. 37% of Londoners are non-British born. And yet, when you go to main stages in theatre in London, when you go, to the National Theatre, when you go to any big theatre, really, it is very rarely that you hear a non-British accent, or you see a performance that is, inspired or led by a, less traditional, less naturalistic approach. So I think, as part of the Migrants in Theatre organization, we started organizing these town halls, and they were obviously on Zoom because this was during the pandemic in 2020. And the town halls to which we were inviting artistic directors and to which we were inviting people in the position of power to give them our arguments, to give them facts, because it became very clear for us that no one has really researched that problem before. So it involved a lot of, fact checking, putting our arguments forward. And it so happened that, to one of the town halls, we had royal court. And I spoke about, really exploring form, exploring non-British, non-traditional way of making theatre, and I think that being a statement in itself in a country that is really tightening its borders of, we can be open-minded, we can be inquisitive about what's going on outside. And, that's where it went from. I think the Royal Court just started thinking about it and started thinking about the fact that, they are an internationally recognized institution. They are an institution with a huge political, history. And they are that's the history of, people who are positioning themselves against the status quo, against those who are in power. Excuse me. So, especially the Royal Court 30, 40 years ago, that's what it was. Right. And so I think, those ideas just really spoke to them on a level, and I'm very glad that they did, because we've been talking since then, and that's when I devised and structured the program, and now it's going ahead. So very exciting, 6 months. That's going to be
you're developing it over 6 months, and it's
yes,
and it's about the migrant experience. It's called No Borders, and
I think No Borders in terms of how we make theatre. It's more about looking at practices of people who don't make the work in the traditional way, learning from them. People like Milo Rao, people like Lola Arias from Latin America. And just really broadening the horizons. And it's going to be a 6-month program with, a number of participants, probably around 12. And the program there's many things to it. It's 2 sessions a month, one online, one in person, and at the end of it there will be a physical showing of something, because it's something that I get really, really passionate and frustrated about. Is there are so many these schemes in different institutions, the schemes that are supposed to help the emerging playwright, the emerging director, but yet people don't get a chance to physically do something. And I think an attachment to a building isn't enough. So that's why, there's going to be a showing at the end of it.
Omicron permitting.
Yes, of course.
that will come and go like the rest of them. The question is what's behind it, and how we all on all the continents, how we actually cope with that, whether we're actually capable of coping with it, which is an open question. The final question, which was we had alluded to earlier, and it seems to be very much in line with what your piece is about, and that is a question you posited before we started recording, and that what is the point of doing theater in the 21st century?
I don't know. No, I do. I sometimes I don't know, and I think that's fine. But I keep reminding myself that I have to keep asking myself that question, because otherwise I become I don't know if it's the complacency or it's just being too comfortable, but there's that tendency of like, and I've been working, pretty regularly since March, since theaters reopened in Britain, and it's very easy to just go, oh, this is my life now. I go into rooms, I do this thing, but actually it is about keeping myself on my toes and not taking anything for granted. To me, it's and to me, I think the pandemic again reminded me about this. There is nothing else like it. There's this idea that we sit in a dark room together, and I think the collectiveness of it and being together in a physical space, that's something that I don't think can be and it's always different every night, right? And there's something so immediate about it. And for me, I come from that background, and I come from a country where theater has historically always been on the barricades and always fought, for the lack of a better word, the oppressor. And the oppressor might have changed throughout decades or centuries, but the theater stayed on the right side of history. And for me, it is that power of it. And I often have to, remind myself that that's just because I don't see it maybe daily here. And it happened, when I was in Kosovo, when you were in Kosovo as well, that I thought to myself, wow,
yeah,
this is real. This is connected to here and now. This is connected to the history of this country. This is connected to its people. And I think, for me, it's that immediate need of collecting the experiences and putting them in front of a bunch of people who are willing to witness that.
Nastazja Domaradzka, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It was a pleasure.